Putin's sphere of influence is collapsing in front of our eyes. The humiliation is complete. His Soviet allies are now abandoning Russia to join NATO. The latest betrayal comes from the South Caucasus. After brokering a peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the United States instantaneously ripped away 30 years of Russian leverage. Now Azerbaijan is actively converting its entire army to NATO standards, getting ready to join the alliance. This is a geopolitical catastrophe for Moscow. Azerbaijan is also refusing to touch sanctioned Russian oil, and in response to Russian aggression, even countries like Serbia are ready to supply ammunition to Ukraine. Putin's military failure has led to a political isolation for the country. Every time Russia throws a tantrum, its allies defect, proving that Putin is not master of the region, but the greatest salesman NATO has ever had. So this whole thing started when the United States brokered a peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan in August of this year. Take a look.
President of the United States, the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, and the Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia will now sign the joint declaration on the outcomes of the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity Summit.
That's really
They will
beautiful.
sign 3 copies in English. The President of the United States signs as a witness to the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia, affirming their path to peace, stability, and prosperity. We kindly ask that all guests remain seated for the signing of the documents.
Now, many people overlooked that this even happened and how big of a deal this was. But let's be honest, the world has been on fire for the last few months, so it's completely understandable. But for Russia, this was a massive hit to their influence in the region. You see, for more than 30 years, Armenia and Azerbaijan have been locked in one of the most devastating conflicts of the post-Soviet era. It all goes back to this region called Nagorno-Karabakh. It's a region inside Azerbaijan, but it's home to mostly ethnic Armenians. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the region erupted into war. Armenia took control of Karabakh and the surrounding districts, forcing hundreds of thousands of Azeris to move. But then for decades, the frozen conflict defined the region. Guess who controlled the whole situation? Right, it was Russia. Moscow was arming both sides, mediating peace talks, and positioning itself as the indispensable power broker. Armenia completely depended on Russia for protection, and Azerbaijan, whether it liked it or not, had to play along because Russia was the main power in the region. For Moscow, this was a great situation because a frozen conflict gave them permanent leverage. But everything changed in 2020, when Azerbaijan, backed by Turkey, retook most of the territory. Russia sent peacekeepers but refused to actually defend Armenia as it has promised. This was the moment when Armenia realized that Russian security guarantees are basically a myth. Armenia was shaken after all this, but 3 years later, in 2023, everything actually collapsed. In fact, it's impossible to understand the peace deal that happened this year without understanding what happened in 2023. At the start of the year, Azerbaijan blockaded the only road that connected Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh. This was a literal lifeline for 120,000 Armenians living in that enclave. Food, medicine, fuel, everything flowed through this road. That's why when the blockade began, Armenia turned to the one country that had promised to defend them. That was Russia. But as you guys remember, Russia was a bit occupied in 2023. So Russia did nothing, not even a statement, not any pressure campaign, not military protection, not even humanitarian airlifts. For Armenians, this was a betrayal on a catastrophic scale. But things weren't over. In September of 2023, Azerbaijan launched a one-day blitz operation into the Nagorno-Karabakh region, crushing the remaining Armenian forces. This ended 30 years of Armenian control in just a single day. And again, Russia, which is supposed to be the guarantor, the protector, the self-declared master of the region, simply watched. There was no intervention, no deterrence, no consequences from the Russian side. In fact, Russian peacekeepers in the region literally stood aside as Karabakh collapsed. Well, as you can guess, after this, Armenia's relationship with Russia was finished. It wasn't just a political disappointment. This was existential betrayal. Armenia then froze its participation in CSTO, which is like the Russian version of NATO. Armenian officials, in fact, openly said that Russia is no longer a reliable ally. The Armenian government started shifting towards the United States and the EU for security, and they even expanded military cooperation with Western countries. All of this made possible the August peace deal. That's why the United States stepped in and brokered a peace deal between the two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan. It wasn't just diplomacy, it was like a geopolitical earthquake. Because if Washington can solve a conflict that Moscow has kept frozen for 30 years, it means Russia has officially lost control of the region. And we can see that if we look at the actions of the country. Armenia is turning west, Azerbaijan is now closely working with NATO states, and the entire South Caucasus region is turning into a US-EU-Turkey security orbit. This has been all made possible by Putin's 3-day special military operation. Now, of course, like usual, Russia cannot admit the reality. So it's claiming that it wasn't the United States, but it was Russia that actually made possible the peace between the two countries. Take a listen.
It seems to me that it was Russia that helped to settle the relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Russia is a deciding factor in the stability of the entire South Caucasus. If we look at the history of the development of relations, there were practically no conflicts between Azerbaijan and Armenia under the patronage of Russia, and all the conflicts that arose were quickly settled with the help of Russia. Unfortunately, those attempts by some Western countries to interfere in the settlement of the Armenian-Azerbaijani relations, and this is an attempt to squeeze Russia out of the South Caucasus, they bring no benefit. The benefit is exactly the opposite. They add nervousness, complexity, and ambiguity.
Now, I don't know about you guys, but I did not see a Russian representative sitting on that table when these two countries signed the peace deal. Maybe I'm going blind or something. But then again, in my defense though, based on the news coming out of Azerbaijan, it doesn't seem like Russia has any influence in the region. Azerbaijan just announced that it will no longer be touching sanctioned Russian oil. It has banned Lukoil from using the port in Baku. As if this wasn't bad enough, the Azerbaijani military is also switching off from Russian standards and onto the NATO one. This is a big deal because it's kinda a sign of what's about to come. First, let me explain what it means to convert to NATO standards. Now, I'm not a military expert, so in simple terms, Azerbaijan will basically reform its army so they can better operate with NATO forces and NATO partners. This means using the same terminology, using similar equipment, maybe even same equipment, using similar ammunition and common procedures that NATO uses. It also means that Azerbaijani forces will be involved in some NATO exercises and NATO trainings. Of course, this all gives Azerbaijan a lot of options in the future. If they want to join NATO, it will become easier to apply and go through that path after they have made all these changes. But on top of that, I'm guessing Azerbaijan doesn't want to be buying Russian weapons after seeing how things are playing out in Ukraine. So now they have option to buy more and more Western weapons because they are standardizing their army to NATO standards. Either way, this is definitely not a good news for Russia because this is not just some statement. It seems like the actions are already being taken to make this a reality. Just earlier this week, Azerbaijani representatives met with NATO Assistant General Secretary. At these meetings, they discussed cooperation agenda and regional security. Almost every single NATO country had a representative here, so it was definitely a big deal. We are also seeing Azerbaijani army officers take courses, NATO courses at NATO facilities. These courses are basically teaching these officers NATO's way of strategic thinking, regional security, and international cooperation. So I'm sure you guys are wondering, well, how does Russia respond to everything? By attacking. So take a look at this. Russia just striked an Azerbaijani embassy in Kyiv. The president of Azerbaijan told Zelensky directly that this is not the first time Russian forces have targeted the embassy. Now, of course, Azerbaijan condemns this attack, and Russia has said that this was just a mistake. But if you look at the timings of Russian attacks on Azerbaijani embassies, it seems like there's a pattern here, and it's hard to say that this pattern is all a mistake. The last time Russia attacked this embassy was in August, the same month when Azerbaijan and Armenia signed a peace deal. And on top of that, Russia wasn't happy about the statements the president of Azerbaijan was making. Just take a listen to this.
Ukraine should not waste time on military solutions since Russian military potential is bigger and resources are larger. The country should focus on diplomatic efforts, because the longer the war continues, the harder it will be for Ukraine. And I can only give advice based on our experience in Karabakh. We used all diplomatic means in our capacity, but when it didn't work, we switched to military solutions.
To me, it seems like Russia attacks Azerbaijan every time they're unhappy with something Azerbaijanis are doing. But what Putin fails to realize is that every time he's trying to send out this message that he's some strongman, it's not convincing countries to not go west. In fact, it just pushes more and more countries towards NATO and towards Western alliances. Putin invaded Ukraine because he wanted to stop Ukraine from turning into a Western country. Well, guess what? Ukraine still wants to join NATO. The reason Ukraine is not in NATO is because United States and Germany and some other countries are vetoing that application, not because Ukraine doesn't want to join. And on top of that, after Putin's invasion, Finland and Sweden have joined NATO, expanding NATO's borders at Russia's doorstep. So, it's not that Putin is stopping NATO, it's rather he's helping NATO expand. But anyways, it's not just Azerbaijan that's turning on Russia. We even have the Serbian president, who has been a bit pro-Russian since this invasion started, now changing his tune. At the start of this month, he made a statement saying that Serbia is ready to supply ammunition to Europe, with Europe being free to send it to Ukraine. Now, the reason this is kind of a big deal is because Serbia produces a lot of ammunition, and so far it seems they had assured Russia that they will not be giving it to Ukraine. But now it seems that's not the case, and Russia is very unhappy about it. Here's the Russian response.
Мы неоднократно, в том числе на высшем уровне,
We have repeatedly received from the leadership of Serbia, including at a higher level, that export of Serbian munitions is under strict control. This product will not be delivered to Ukraine, so Kiev could use it against our military personnel. I refuse to even discuss not only the possibility, but in general as a topic that Russian soldiers who historically gave their heart in all senses of this word
отдавали свое сердце во всех смыслах этого слова, отдавая жизнь свою,
giving your life or confessing love and loyalty to Serbian brothers, will be defeated or killed with Serbian weapons, ammunition, and shells. And that this will be done not by some hellish coincidence or a wild coincidence,
снарядами. И что это будет сделано
but in one way or another with elements of intentionality and thoughtfulness. I refuse to even think about it.
намеренности и продуманности. Я отказываюсь об этом даже думать.
So I think this trend is pretty clear, and we want to give credit where credit is due. Putin is most definitely the greatest salesman NATO has ever had. So can we please take a second and give him a round of applause? Now, as you guys saw in this video, there's a lot of things happening in the geopolitical space that are important, but many people never see the news about it. That's because traditional organizations are not very good at covering important geopolitical events. That's why we launched Global Recaps. It's a free geopolitical newsletter that covers important news in a simplified manner. Every evening, we send out an email directly to your inbox covering all the important stories. You can read this email in just a few minutes. Trust me, I do it every night. And best of all, it's completely free. So you can sign up right now by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on your screen. Or you can go to globalrecaps.com. By signing up, you become more knowledgeable about the world you live in. So thank you so much. My name is Sam, and I'll see you guys in the next one.